Lili has a PhD from the National University of Ireland, Galway. She's been focusing on Irish perceptions of the successor states of Austria-Hungary in her PhD, and her research interests include Irish and Central European history and transnational history. And today she'll be talking about the significance of Central European border settlements in the work of the Northeastern Boundary Bureau and the Boundary Commission in Ireland before 1925.
So, as you can see on the title of my presentation, I will be focusing on the Northeastern Boundary Bureau and the Boundary Commission in Ireland, and looking at Central European precedents. Let's just look at the details. So, first, I will be providing a brief background to the Irish boundary question, and after that I will touch upon the most important points in historiography regarding Irish perceptions of borders in East Central Europe after 1918. I will move on to discuss partition history in detail, concentrating on the Northeastern Boundary Bureau and the Boundary Commission. Then I will provide an insight into, a very brief insight into Irish interest in the minority problem in European borderland regions after 1925. The period from 1919 to 1922 saw the transformation of political order in Ireland, while the right to self-determination and independence remained in the centre of Irish political rhetoric. With the outbreak of the Irish War of Independence and the opening of the first double Ireland, that was the Irish Parliament, in January 1919, the relationship between Ireland and Britain deteriorated. Even though the struggle between Unionists and Nationalists had been present in Irish politics in the form of the Home Rule debates, it was the Government of Ireland Act of 1920 that created the two states of Southern Ireland and Northern Ireland, establishing two parliaments as well. Then the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 brought further legislation to settle the relationship, allowing Northern Ireland to opt out of the Irish Free State. In this case, the Boundary Commission of 3 members was supposed to be set up to create. The Boundary Commission was to be created to amend the at the present provisional border between Northern Ireland, which was still part of the UK, and the Irish Free State that gained Dominion status. Now, the treaty, the Anglo-Irish Treaty of December 1921, only provided a partial achievement, and a full republic was only declared decades later, gaining full formal sovereignty for 26 counties in 1949. The creation of a Boundary Commission was decided in order to amend the border between the Free State and Northern Ireland as part of Article 12 in the treaty. That you can see on the slide there as well. So the final border was to be determined, quote, in accordance with the wishes of the inhabitants, so far as may be compatible with economic and geographic conditions, end quote. As historian Paul Murray highlighted, the year the Government of Ireland Act partitioned Ireland, territories in parts of Europe were also being partitioned. They were assigned to states that laid claim on them as a result of the post-war treaties that radically redrew the map of Europe. Therefore, this controversy in relation to boundaries prompted an open Irish attitude towards similar precedents on the continent, as the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire also left border disputes. The last few months of 1918 saw the complete transformation of the multicultural Habsburg Central Europe from a dual monarchy into a number of independent small states. Stephen Howe has argued that the struggle for Irish independence was comparable to Czechoslovakia and Hungary, quote, attaining independence from alien rule, end of quote. Interestingly, this was contradicted by contemporary Irish documents that never put the two groups, being the Czechs and Slovaks and the Hungarians, into the same camp, because because they rather follow the logic of British Slavists such as Robert William Seton Watson, with their attitude of presenting the Hungarians in the role of the oppressors instead of showing them, or instead of seeing them as also being liberated from alien rule of the Austrians. Furthermore, Stephen Howe has also claimed that comparing the experience of conflict, secession, and redrawing of boundaries across Europe and beyond was worth investigating. Although circumstances were different in Ireland and Central Europe, the question of border revisions in the Danube Basin sparked Irish interest. When historian Patrick Keating described Ireland as, quote, a revisionist small state, both in respect of the constitutional relationship with Britain and its partition that gave added edge to the Irish attitude of anti-imperialism in the 1920s and 30s, he identified common ground between Ireland and other small states in Central Europe based on the revision of treaties, the Anglo-Irish Treaty and the Versailles Peace Treaties, respectively. Correspondingly, in more recent historiography, Michael Kennedy has confirmed that interwar Ireland was siding with the revisionist states, urging the revision of the post-war peace treaties and constructing Irish foreign policy as part of the post-Versailles world order. Joseph Lee has also compared Irish socio-economic and political developments with the case of other small states, also pointing out the differences between post-war border disputes in Ireland and Central Europe. Lee has emphasized that after the Great War, quote, borders were revised in Central and Eastern Europe in favor of smaller states. This was precisely what did not happen in Fermanagh and Tyrone. And while the Irish Free State had no Banat, no Silesia, no Slovakia, and no Transylvania, Northern Ireland was, nevertheless, still the object of irredentist nationalist claims. Therefore, irredentism was a key factor in the context of border-related conflicts both in Ireland and its successor states. Joa Claerson has explained this with the fact that irredentism seemed to be the, quote, logical and almost unavoidable extension, and the quote, of nationalism in post-war Europe. Similarly, Paul Murray, in a major study of the Irish Boundary Commission, compared the claims of Irish nationalists and Central European irredentists. He concluded that since the 1801 Act of Union was still in effect, in partitioning Ireland, the British legislature was establishing a new boundary within part of the United Kingdom over which it exercised the same political control as it did over other parts. The boundary settlements in Central and Eastern Europe, in contrast, were the result of external interference with the territorial integrity of states which found themselves on the losing side of the First World War. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, the Boundary Commission was established in order to amend the border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. And in order to do so, the Northeastern Boundary Bureau was established, and it had its main purposes were research and propaganda. So the provisional government-sponsored Northeastern Boundary Bureau that was established in October 1922. And after this, the Boundary Commission that first met in November 1924 were to make a decision, as I also mentioned above, in accordance with the wishes of the inhabitants, so far as it may be compatible with economic and geographic conditions, echoing again the Wilsonian concept of self-determination mentioned in these 14 points. The Boundary Commission had 3 members, an Irish member that was Owen McNeill, Minister for Education at the time. The North Irish member actually was not appointed by the Northern Irish Parliament or government because they refused to take part. So the actual Northern Irish representative was appointed by Britain, and his name was Joseph R. Fisher, and he was a unionist newspaper editor. And the British member was a South African gentleman called Justice Richard Feetham. The members of the Northeastern Boundary Bureau, as you can see on the slide, were Director Kevin O'Sheil, who was from a Northern Irish nationalist background from County Tyrone, the researcher Walton Seawater, and Edward Newington Stevens. I'm going to talk a few few words about them in a minute. So in order to support their claim with successful precedents, the Northeastern Boundary Bureau investigated similar boundary settlements in post-war Europe. Director Kevin O'Sheil, researcher Walter C. Waller, and Secretary Edward Millington Stevens were the most involved in the process. O'Sheil requested Waller, an expert on European boundary disputes, to advise him. Waller later actually became the president of the Irish League of Nations Society as well. So Waller, who was in charge of researching international precedents full-time in London, argued that in Ireland, a plebiscite was simply unnecessary due to the fact that the wishes of the inhabitants were well known as a result of the elections of 1920, stressing that the expense and possible danger of a plebiscite are best to be avoided. Ian Stevens, barrister and civil servant, was also required to study recent European precedents for territorial transfer on the basis of local plebiscites, to collect data and to intermediate between the Dublin government and nationalist officials in border areas. Moreover, the Irish trade representative in Berlin at the time, Charles Bewley, later minister to Germany between 1933 and 1939, also infamous for his pro-Nazi and anti-Semitic sentiments, also furnished the Bureau with certain particulars regarding the boundary commissions on the continent. In particular, Bewley sent reports on the Upper Silesian plebiscite and the work of the Schleswig Commission. Historian Paul Murray has highlighted the fact that the Bureau had found the plebiscites of the following territories noteworthy. Upper Silesia, March 21, between Poland and Germany, Schleswig, February and March 1920, between Denmark and Germany, and Klagenfurt in southeastern Carinthia, October 1920, between Austria and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, in addition to general border settlements in Hungary and the border between the Czechs and the Germans in Bohemia. In these areas, or actually most of these areas, plebiscites were employed as the means of ascertaining the wishes of inhabitants with a view to assigning them to the jurisdiction of their choice. The wording of Article 12 in the Anglo-Irish Treaty was almost identical with that of the various boundary clauses in the Treaty of Versailles, and Murray has argued that it was clearly copied from them. As far as the border between Austria and Hungary was concerned, Austria successfully claimed Western Hungary, or the Burgenland, with the exception of Sopron or Ödenburg, and was permitted to occupy these territories on the 7th of August 1921. In the city of Sopron, or Ödenburg, a plebiscite in December 1921 decided in favor of staying under the Hungarian state. The plebiscite was attacked by many non-Magyar contemporaries and was later questioned by historians as well. Throughout the conflict, the Irish press, relying on Reuters cable grants from Berlin and telegrams from Vienna, echoed the Austrian opinion. Interestingly, though, there were no references to this particular precedent in the records of the Northeastern Boundary Bureau nor the Boundary Commission, despite the large publicity the events attracted in the Irish papers. In the registry of NAB documents, the file compiled in relation to the North Hungarian border and the question of the Ruthenian minority was actually a copy of the Czechoslovak memorandum presented at the Paris Peace Conference. Therefore, it reflected the argument of the Czechoslovak Republic claiming the territory inhabited by Ruthenians in the northeastern part of the former Jew monarchy. The Czechoslovak memorandum stressed that, quote, the Ruthenians of Hungary, a nation closely related to the Slovaks, live under the same conditions as the Slovaks, that they were in very intimate relation with them, that their union to the Czechoslovak Republic would cause no difficulty whatever. End of quote. They also emphasized that this solution, quote, would best respond to the political reality and to the principles of justice. End of quote. Similarly, other NAB documents regarding continental precedents, such as the case of territorial disputes over the Corinthian Klagenfurt or Celebes between Austria and Yugoslavia, or, well, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, as well as the Bohemian Germans, or other general territorial demands of Czechoslovakia, were all based on Czech and Yugoslav memoranda, respectively, presented at the Peace Conference. In consequence, when it came to Irish claims in relation to the northeastern boundary, there were very few references to Austrian or Hungarian examples despite the high number of incidents, including the occasional plebiscites there. This also included the fact that the actual outcome of the plebiscite of Klagen for Telovets were not touched upon the work of the Boundary Bureau whatsoever. Ida Sagara, who is the biographer of Kevin O'Sheil, has pointed out that the phrasing of Article 12 of the Anglo-Irish Treaty and its interpretation by the Free State is to be understood in the context of the plebiscitary politics of post-war Central Europe, notably as laid down in the treaties of Versailles and Trianon, referring to Upper Silesia, Klagenfurt, Burgenland, North Schleswig and East Prussia. As the Austro-Hungarian Empire was defeated in the Great War, their successors' claims were treated differently by the great powers at and after Versailles than the victorious, newly independent small states in the region. Therefore, when the Irish Commission was looking for a precedent to support Irish nationalist demands, they rather examined the appeals of the previously successful small states. Altogether, the very fact that the question of boundaries was in dispute created a greater Irish interest in the territorial settlement in Europe. When it came to the boundary issue in Ireland, eventually no plebiscite was held, despite the research done by the NEB and the personal experience of, for instance, F.B. Bourdion, who was the secretary of the Irish Boundary Commission and formerly a member of the Upper Silesian Commission between 1920 and 22, whose interest in the boundary situation on the continent was well documented. Therefore, Irish newspapers regularly pointed to the Versailles treaties when discussing the prevailing minorities question in Central Europe, in parallel with the legacy of the Irish border settlement. The Free State's disappointment with regards to the Boundary Commission was undeniable. Eventually, the existing borders were confirmed on the 3rd of December 1925 after the British Conservatives' Morning Post leaked the planned transfers on the 7th of November 1925. The report of the Boundary Commission was buried and suppressed and not published until 1969. The Irish dissatisfaction with the borders in the early 1920s resulted actually in an active participation in the League of Nations, where they gained membership in 1923 with the very active work of Kevin O'Sheil that I mentioned above, who was the director of the Northeastern Boundary Bureau. This was crucial. The League of Nations membership was crucial for the Free State under both the Cumann government under William T. Cosgrave in the 20s and under Fianna Fáil's Eamon de Valera after 1932. And interestingly, although during the interwar years the Irish External Affairs took a close interest in the minority problems at Geneva, at the same time the department was also keen on adhering to a non-partitionist attitude in relation to Ireland when it came to international maneuvers in Geneva. Roger Brubaker has noted that after the Great War, borderland conflicts in Central Europe became internationalized. For small states like the Free State, a crucial aspect of League of Nations membership was the organization's declared role as protecting ethnic and religious minorities. Therefore, when expecting the support of other small nations, it was not surprising when Irish diplomats like the Irish High Commission in London, Timothy Smithy, articulated the view that they imagined the Irish Free State to become both a champion of national interests of small states and also of minorities. End of quote. In conclusion, it can be established that contemporary Irish intellectuals, politicians and journalists were aware of the transformation of Austria-Hungary after the Great War and also had a genuine interest in the controversial nature of border settlements and territorial changes in Habsburg Central Europe. The troubling nature of minority issues was also frequently discussed in the Irish press in the interwar years. This was mostly visible in Irish comments regarding the Sudetan Germans in the Czechoslovak state, the formerly Austrian Catholics in the South Tyrol, the Hungarians along the frontiers of Czechoslovakia, Romania and Yugoslavia. Consequently, even though the Boundary Commission failed to alter the Irish border, as Patrick Murray claimed, the history of its work should be viewed as part of a larger European narrative. So, as we have seen, the importance of Central European precedents within the context of Irish partition and boundary settlements sheds light on a lesser discussed part of Irish nationalist discourse, namely the outward-looking attitude Irish nationalists had even in relation to partition. Therefore, this paper hoped to highlight the significance of the wider international context when investigating the Irish border question in the early interwar years. It aimed to illustrate Irish awareness of the political transformation of Central Eastern Europe and territorial settlements after the Great War, with special attention to plebiscites in the territory of the former Habsburg Central Europe, also emphasizing the significance of the League of Nations, particularly after the failure of the Boundary Commission.